Men like him never called me unless the city was already bleeding. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. Not my business line. My personal number. The one only a handful of people had access to. And when I picked it up, there was a pause on the other end. Not silence. A pause. The kind of pause that means someone's deciding whether to say what they actually called to say. Then I heard his voice. Measured, tired, careful, Mr. Johnson. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I recognized it immediately. The mayor. Not through a secretary. Not through an intermediary. Him. Directly. That told me two things right away. First, whatever was happening was serious enough that normal channels couldn't handle it. Second, this conversation was never going to be acknowledged. No record. No witnesses. Just two men who understood that sometimes official power needs unofficial solutions. You wouldn't be calling if you didn't need to, I said. Another pause. I have a situation. It's delicate. And the usual methods aren't producing results quickly enough. Delicate. That was a political word for dangerous. And when a mayor uses the word delicate at 2 in the morning, it means people are scared and he's running out of options. What kind of situation? I asked. The kind that could spiral, he said. The kind that brings federal attention. The kind that ends careers. I sat up, lit a cigarette. Waited for him to continue. There's been unrest, he said carefully. In multiple neighborhoods. Started 3 days ago. Small incidents. But they're escalating. And the police response is making things worse, not better. I understood immediately. Racial tensions. Police brutality. Communities on edge. And every heavy-handed police action inflaming things further. The kind of situation where the city could explode if someone struck the wrong match. Why are you calling me? I asked, even though I already knew. Because you have influence in communities where I don't, he said. Where my police commissioners don't. Where official authority is seen as the problem, not the solution. There it was. The truth underneath the careful language. He needed someone who could calm Harlem down without badges, without press conferences, without official intervention that would only make things worse. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. I'm asking you to help prevent something terrible from happening, he said. I'm asking you to use whatever influence you have to de-escalate before this becomes national news. Before people die. Before the federal government decides New York can't manage its own affairs. Before it destroys your career, I thought. But I didn't say it. Because that was understood. And what do I get in return? I asked. He hesitated. What do you want? That was the wrong question. Because what I wanted wasn't what this conversation was about. This wasn't a negotiation where I extracted concessions. This was something more complicated. This was the mayor of New York admitting that legal authority couldn't solve a problem that illegal influence could. And that admission was worth more than any deal we could make. I don't want anything, I said. But I need to understand what you're really asking. You want me to calm things down in Harlem. How am I supposed to do that? What tools am I allowed to use? Whatever works, he said quietly. As long as it's quiet. Whatever works. That gave me permission to operate outside the law as long as I didn't create embarrassment. As long as the problem went away without headlines. As long as official narratives could be maintained. And if I do this, I said, am I going to wake up to a raid next week? Am I going to find that your police suddenly have renewed interest in my operations? No, he said. You have my word. A politician's word. Normally worthless. But in this case, backed by mutual exposure. Because if he came after me after I solved his problem, I could always make it known that the mayor had personally asked a crime boss for help managing the city. That conversation, even without recordings, would destroy him. Mutually assured destruction. The foundation of every real agreement. "I'll need 24 hours, I said. "Thank you," he said. And hung up. I sat there in the dark for a long time after that call. Smoking. Thinking. Running scenarios. The situation he described was real. I'd been hearing about it for days. Police had beaten a teenager in Brooklyn. Word spread. Protests started. Police responded with more force. More protests. More force. The cycle was accelerating. And the problem was that both sides were right. The community had legitimate grievances. The police were scared and undermanned. Every confrontation made things worse. Every attempt at control created more resistance. The mayor's people had tried negotiating with community leaders. Didn't work. The leaders couldn't control the anger even if they wanted to. They tried increased police presence. Made it worse. They tried pulling police back. Created a vacuum that let agitators take over. They were out of moves. Every official option just added fuel. But I had something they didn't have. Trust. Not universal trust. Not unconditional trust. But enough trust in enough places that when I said something, people listened. Because I'd earned it. Because I'd been there. Because I wasn't asking them to trust the system. I was asking them to trust me. The question was whether I should help. On one hand, the mayor was asking me to do his job for him. To clean up a mess his police department had created. To protect his political career while taking all the risk myself. If things went wrong, he'd deny the conversation ever happened. If things went right, he'd take the credit. On the other hand, people were going to get hurt. Buildings were going to burn. Federal agents were going to occupy Harlem like it was a war zone. And the community I'd spent my life protecting was going to suffer whether I helped the mayor or not. The choice wasn't between helping him or not helping him. The choice was between preventing disaster on my terms or watching disaster happen on someone else's terms. I chose control. I always choose control. The next morning, I started making calls. Not to police. Not to politicians. To people who mattered in the streets. Ministers. Business owners. Community organizers. People who had credibility with the young men who were ready to fight. I didn't tell them the mayor had called me. That would have made them suspicious, made them think I was selling out. I just told them the truth. Things were escalating, people were going to die, and we needed to find a way to calm things down without giving up our dignity or our demands. I organized meetings. Small ones. In churches. In community centers. Places where people felt safe. And I listened. That was the key. I didn't come in telling people what to do. I came in listening to what they needed. What I heard was this: people wanted accountability. They wanted the officers who'd beaten that teenager held responsible. They wanted assurance it wouldn't happen again. They wanted to know someone was listening. The mayor couldn't give them that. Not quickly. Not publicly. Because admitting fault would open the city to lawsuits and political attacks. But I could create the impression that someone was listening. I could create space for anger to be expressed without violence. I could show that resistance didn't have to be destructive to be heard. I talked to the ministers about organizing peaceful vigils. Gave them resources to feed people, to create gathering spaces that felt purposeful instead of chaotic. I talked to business owners about keeping stores open, keeping lights on, maintaining normalcy even as protests happened outside. And I talked to the young men who were ready to fight. That was the hardest conversation. Because they were right to be angry. They were right to want confrontation. And I couldn't tell them they were wrong without losing all credibility. So I didn't tell them they were wrong. I told them they were being played. You think burning down your own neighborhood hurts the police? I asked. You think fighting cops in the street changes policy? All that does is give them an excuse to crack down harder. All that does is prove to white people watching the news that you're dangerous and need to be controlled. So we're supposed to do nothing, one of them said. No, I said. You're supposed to be smart. You want accountability. You organize. You document everything. You make sure every news camera in the city is watching when you march peacefully and they still try to beat you down. You make them look like the aggressors. You take away their justification. That sounds like giving up, another said. It's not, I said. It's strategy. You fight when you can win. Right now, if you riot, you lose. The federal government sends troops. Harlem gets occupied. Your families get hurt. And nothing changes except you have a record and they have an excuse. I could see them thinking about it. Wrestling with it. Because they wanted to fight. They needed to fight. But they also knew I wasn't someone who told them to back down out of fear. Give it 2 weeks, I said. Peaceful protests. Documentation. Political pressure. If nothing changes in 2 weeks, we revisit the conversation. But right now, you're about to hand them exactly what they want. Don't do it. It wasn't a perfect argument. But it was enough. Enough to buy time. Enough to redirect energy into something that wouldn't end in blood. I also made other calls. To people who had been agitating. People who didn't live in Harlem but who showed up when things got tense because they wanted chaos. I made it very clear that their presence wasn't welcome. That if they started trouble in my neighborhood, they'd answer to me. Not to the police. To me. And because people knew what that meant, most of them left. Within 48 hours, the energy on the streets changed. There were still protests. Still anger. But it was organized. Focused. The kind of demonstration that news cameras could show without making it look like the city was falling apart. The police, for their part, backed off. I don't know if the mayor ordered it or if they just recognized that heavy-handed responses weren't working. But they gave the protesters space. Let them march. Let them chant. Didn't escalate. After a week, the worst of it was over. The teenager who'd been beaten, his family got a settlement. Quiet. No admission of wrongdoing. But compensation and a promise of investigation. The officers involved were reassigned. Not fired. But removed from the neighborhood. It wasn't justice. But it was enough to take the edge off. Enough to make people feel like someone had listened. The crisis ended. The federal government never intervened. The mayor gave a press conference talking about community dialogue and police reform. Took credit for de-escalation through leadership and communication. Never mentioned me. Never acknowledged the call. Never admitted that official authority had failed and unofficial influence had succeeded. Exactly as we'd both known it would happen. A month later, I got another call. Different time. Different number. Same voice. I wanted to thank you, the mayor said. For what? I asked. For your help. With the situation. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. He paused. Understanding. Of course. Well. I appreciate your civic-mindedness. Happy to live in a peaceful city, I said. We all benefit from stability. Another pause. If you ever need anything. Within reason. You know how to reach me. I'll keep that in mind, I said. And hung up. I never called in that favor. Didn't need to. Because the value wasn't in getting something from him. The value was in him knowing he owed me. In him understanding that his power had limits and mine didn't always. That dynamic, that quiet understanding, was worth more than any specific concession. Because the next time there was trouble, the police response was different. More measured. More aware that heavy-handed approaches created problems that official channels couldn't solve. More conscious that there were other powers in the city that could help or hurt depending on how they were treated. I didn't become less of a criminal. The mayor didn't become corrupt. But we both understood that the city ran on agreements, not laws. On relationships, not regulations. On quiet conversations that could never be acknowledged but that shaped everything. That's what people don't understand about power at that level. It's not about control. It's about alignment. It's about recognizing when your interests overlap with someone else's interests, even when you're supposed to be enemies. The mayor needed Harlem calm. I needed Harlem safe. Those aren't the same thing, but they're close enough that we could work toward the same objective without betraying our respective positions. He got to look like a competent leader who prevented disaster through communication and reform. I got to protect my community from violence and federal occupation. Both true. Both incomplete. Both dependent on a conversation that never officially happened. That's politics. That's power. That's how cities actually work when you strip away the mythology. Years later, someone asked me if I ever felt used by politicians. If I ever felt like I was doing their dirty work for them. I told them the truth: politicians don't use people like me. They need us. And there's a difference. When someone uses you, they have power over you. When someone needs you, you have leverage. The mayor needed me that night. Needed me to solve a problem his police couldn't solve. Needed me to prevent a crisis his administration couldn't handle. And by needing me, he gave me something more valuable than money or protection. He gave me proof that official power has limits. That legal authority isn't enough. That sometimes the people who are supposed to be outside the system are the ones holding it together. And that proof, that understanding, changes every future interaction. Because now when police want to raid my operations, someone has to ask whether it's worth the cost. Whether we can afford to alienate someone who might be needed again. Whether creating an enemy out of someone who's been useful is smart strategy. I'm not saying I became untouchable. I'm saying I became complicated. Too complicated to deal with casually. Too connected to dismiss. Too useful to completely eliminate. That's real power. Not being the strongest. Not being the richest. Not being the most feared. Being the person who can solve problems that official channels can't. Being the person who gets the phone call at 2 in the morning when the city's bleeding. The forbidden favor the mayor asked wasn't about stopping protests or controlling communities. It was about bridging a gap that legal authority couldn't cross. Between government and governed. Between power and people. Between what needed to happen and what could be publicly acknowledged. I was that bridge. And by being that bridge, I became essential in a way that couldn't be written into law or budget or policy. That's why the call stayed secret. Not just to protect him. To protect the arrangement. Because the moment it becomes official, it becomes political. It becomes something people can attack or defend or legislate. And the value disappears. The value is in the silence. In the understanding that exists without documentation. In the phone calls that never happened and the favors that were never asked. That's how forbidden favors work. They're forbidden because acknowledging them destroys their utility. They work because everyone involved has an interest in maintaining the fiction that they never occurred. The city crisis ended. The federal government never intervened. The mayor's career survived. Harlem stayed out of the news. And nobody outside of a very small circle ever knew why. Because cities aren't run by laws. They're run by agreements. Between people who understand that sometimes the system needs help from outside the system to function. The mayor's secret call to me wasn't corruption. It was pragmatism. It was recognizing that formal power and informal power sometimes need to work together to prevent disaster. And my response wasn't collaboration. It was calculation. Understanding that helping him helped my community. That preventing federal occupation protected people I cared about. That solving his problem gave me leverage for future situations. Mutual benefit disguised as mutual exposure. That's the foundation of every forbidden favor. The call happened. The favor was asked. The crisis was resolved. And the truth stayed buried where it belonged. In the silence between official history and actual events. Where all real power lives.